Welcome back to Roundtail Restoration, everybody. My name's Chris. Next to me here is a differential for an early model Triumph Spitfire. 1966 is what I'm going to put it in if I can ever get it rebuilt. Taking it all back apart, went back down to brass tacks, put it all back together, all my measurements and all that kind of stuff. The gear mesh pattern's still not great. I throw some pictures in at the end, and if you guys have any ideas on where I can adjust or what I'm doing wrong or anything really, I'd really appreciate your help. But if you go through the video, you can see that I tried to do everything right and get all my measurements right. Everything's checking out, everything's in spec, but that mesh pattern's still not working for me. So any ideas, any help, tips, videos, whatever you guys think, or maybe it's just good enough and give it a shot and roll with it. I don't know. I'm willing to take all comments and suggestions. So thanks so much for watching. Let's get it sorted. So I've essentially started over, pulled the pinion back out, removed the bearing from it. This is the original bearing. It's kind of beat up, but I had shaved the inside so it can just easily slide in and out and I don't have to press it on. And then started redoing my heights. So I measured the height of the pinion, put it in without any shims with the bearing on it. The height of the pinion I got about 1.12 inches or so, and I went to the thousandth. So 1.120, and then I put that in and I measured the height from the base of the where the carrier goes in to the top of the pinion, and I got about 1.9335. So if you add those two together, you get about 3.0537. So that means that you are that 0.0537 or 53 thousandths too high. Or excuse me, too low, because I'm measuring the depth right to the top of the bearing. So I have to get a shim pack that'll equal that up, and that's just about what I got there. I got about a 0.053 shim pack. So now I've got that sorted out. I'm going to put this bearing back on. I got to press it on, unfortunately, but we'll put that bearing back on, and then I'll redo the measurement and come back and show you what the results of that are. Got the bearing in with the pinion and all that kind of stuff, and then what you do is you tighten this nut down until this one turns with the force necessary to cause a 12 to 16 inch-pound of a force to get that to turn. So what I did, and I did it in the previous video, is I got about a pound of weight here. I'm going to put a yardstick on here and kind of bolt it to here and hold it, and then hang this weight off, and at about 12 inches from the center line, in other words a foot, that would be 12 inch-pounds. Get this thing set up here. All right, so we got that tightened. It's a little bit of trial and error. You just kind of guess, and hopefully you got it right. So 18 inches is halfway. You see it, it's falling already. So I got to get a little bit tighter. This is the only thing about this contraption is obviously you can't get to the nut. So I got to loosen it up, and so it takes some iteration here. It's a little painful, but it works. Then the other painful part is you got to stop the thing from rotating, which I haven't figured out a good way to do that really, except using this piece of steel here. A little bit tighter. And then after you tighten it and do all your iterations, you want to turn this thing, just roll it, make sure it's free rolls, because it will kind of bind a little bit. So you don't want that to happen, and the workshop manual tells you to make sure that you don't forget to do that. All right, so we'll get this guy set up again. I think we're pretty good this time. Yep. All right, so that's close enough. So then you do that, and now we'll measure the height again. Now this is not as tight as it needs to be, right? When you finally go to put the thing in the final assembly, you got to go to like 70 foot-pounds. This is just to get it ready for pinion height. All right, so I've got my trusty depth gauge here. Get that nice and flat on there. And I got 1.875. And then with the pinion height of 1.1202, it's 2.9952. So that tells me that I'm about 5 thousandths shallow. There's no spec on these, unfortunately. So I do have 5 thousandths shims. Take it all back apart, unfortunately. Get that bearing back off. Put one more 5 thousandths shim in here. Put it all back together, tighten it back down, make sure that I am in the in spec for the height. So again, a lot of trial and error here, a lot of unfortunately doing things a couple times, but trying to get it right. So I'll when I'm all done with that iteration, I'll come back. Back and got it measured up. It's right on 3.0002 inches. I went the wrong way. I added a shim. I should have taken away the 5 thousandths shim. So I had to do that twice. So now this pinion height is right down the middle, within 10 thousandths. So hopefully, anyway, within the limitations of my ability to measure stuff. So now we'll go with getting the carrier on there, the differential side of it, the ring gear stuff, and now put that stuff on. Been a couple days, but I'm back. So now that the pinion height depth is set with the shims that are in between this bearing and the pinion itself, now you've got a spacer in here, and there's several shims that go on there, and then this is the end bearing that goes into here. So the idea behind this, the later model cars, this is a crush washer, not a spacer setup like this. This is reusable, so I guess in that aspect it's a little nicer. But with the crush washer, I think what you do is you tighten it down to where you need to go and it crushes appropriately and you're done. Well, here I've got more shims to play with, so again, you're back into the hit and miss and take it apart, put it back together and all that kind of stuff. So the idea here is you get this shim pack full of several shims, just like it was for underneath this bearing. You got that spacer, it goes down there, that guy fits on with the shim pack there, and then this bearing will get pressed all the way down to the bottom there, and what that does is it sets a preload. So you put all that back together, get it all tightened up, and you torque this down, the nut here, at about 70 foot-pounds. And then that very same 12 to 16 inch-pounds required to rotate it that I had done when I was setting the bearing pre-height is exactly what it should cause now. But because this spacer is here and holding these bearings apart to whatever that space is, it doesn't allow it to get so tight that you can't turn it. So these spacers in here, the more spacers, the farther apart, the less spacers, the tighter it gets, and that's how you adjust. Now there's a thumb rule in the workshop manual that for every, let's see what it says, for every 1/1000th of an inch shim thickness, you get about 4 inch-pounds of torque. So right now I'm starting with 37.5 thousandths of a shim pack, and that's about what it was when I took it back apart, and I did have it set up properly. So I have more than enough shims here. I'm not worried about that. I ordered those. I was smart enough. But now we'll put this back together, get it tightened down, get this cinched down, and then do this torque test again. So, and I'll probably take it back apart and all that kind of stuff. But again, without the bean torque wrench or something like that, it's going to be a little harder to actually measure the no kidding torque. So I'm going to have to kind of probably cross my fingers a little bit and hope I nail it. But we'll put this together and I'll come back and show you where it is with this shim pack. And then, you know, I'm not going to bore you with all the assembly stuff. You've seen that now a million times. Well, I'll come back with the results. So got the bearing in there and got the all tightened down to 70 foot-pounds, and I can turn it by hand, as you can see. So what that tells me is it's pretty well set up. It's not too tight that it's pinching the shaft together where I can't turn it. So I got my handy dandy 1 pound of weight here, and I put it on, and that would be where 12 inch-pounds are, right? 12 inches from the center, and it doesn't move. 13, no movement. 14, no movement. 15, no movement. 16, no movement. 17, yep, thought I saw it starting to go. So 17 inch-pounds is about where it's at. So that's out of spec. It's a little too tight. So what that tells me is I don't have a thick enough shim pack in there, and when I'm tightening it down, I'm bringing those two bearings too close together and it's pinching it. So what I can do is add a little bit of thickness, and if you remember, the thumb rule in the workshop manual was for every 1,000th I get 4 inch-pounds. Well, I got to look at my shims, right? So I'll look at my shim packs and see what I've got, and I've got 37.5 thousandths, so I want to go thicker. So I want to go to 38.5 thousandths. So I'm going to tear this back down apart, pull that bearing back out, I'll get that all separated out, put another little shim in there so I get to about 38.5 thousandths, put it all back together and test again. So again, a lot of iterative stuff, but I'm actually kind of lucky there. I'm pretty happy with how close I got to the spec. All right, back and forth with all the shims, just trying to get the right shims in the right spots and all the variations and everything like that. I got it to about, I don't know, about 38 thousandths, 38.5, a little bit in between. And again, 12 to 16, so I put it at the 12. Nothing really. 13, nothing really. 14, nothing really. 15, looks like it kind of sorts of wants to go. 16, and it rolls at 16, it looks like. Try that again. Yep, right at 16 it starts to roll. So, 16 inch-pounds, that's in spec, it's on the high end of the spec. My personal opinion, that's probably where I want it. It probably would have been fine to leave it at 17, just because I expect stuff to settle and all that kind of stuff. So now that that's set, so now I've got my pinion height set, hopefully. I've got my bearing, my pinion preload set, hopefully. Now we'll look at putting the ring gear in and setting all up all the backlash and all that kind of stuff with that. So onward and upward, but I tell you, I'm not confident that I'm gonna make any difference whatsoever, but we'll see. So as I had mentioned, the next thing we have to do is measure the total differential float, and then we're gonna do some other adjustments in here. The unfortunate part about this is you have to take the ring gear off to do this. Not that big of a deal, but just one more thing to have to disassemble. So you essentially get this in there with the ring gear off, you set your dial indicator up like I've got here, and you push the bearing carrier all the way away from the gauge. You're just using your fingers, and then I'll zero that there. And I really like this digital gauge, but it's very very flighty when it comes to zeroing it, probably because it goes to like 5/10 thousandths or something crazy. So that gives me a 0. Now I'm going to push it this way, and that's giving me 75.5 or so, so 75.5 thousandths, give or take. We'll go back, 0 again. Make sure it's actually zeroed up. And it's not. All right, so when you do this, lesson learned, when you do this, you want to push on, and the workshop manual tells you, I'm not paying close enough attention, you want to push on the race, not just the bearing or the carrier, because that race is beveled because it's a race, and you're going to screw your reading up. So now let me zero it. Zero it. Now pushing against the bearing races, bring it all the way, and I'm looking at 86 thousandths. Bring it back, 5/10, no, it's still 0. 86 thousandths again, still pretty close to 0. 86 thousandths again. 0 is getting more flighty, but it's checking out on the other side. All right, we're pretty consistently zeroing it out and getting 87 thousandths. So that's what I'm going to go with. So that says that that is known as the A dimension. So I'll write that down as the A dimension, 87 thousandths. Then it says remove the dial gauge and the differential carrier from the housing, and now I've got to put the crown wheel gear on to measure the mesh. So I'll get this off, get it all put back together, tighten the bolts, tighten down, we'll come back. So now we got the ring gear back on, and now what we're going to do is essentially measure the tooth engagement and how much of play it gets when the teeth are in there, and we'll do some math after that. So what this says is refit the differential unit, which I just did, move the differential unit away from the gauge, so I'm going to push it this way, which will be to the full mesh position, and zero it. So I'm pretty much already there. Zero it. Continuing to have problems with this thing being flighty. All right, that's close enough. Yep. All right, now move the differential towards the gauge and note the reading. This is the in and out of mesh dimension used in the following calculations and referred to as the B dimension. So again, you want to move the whole thing, right? The race is included. Again, move back, make sure I'm at practically 0. So 47.5 thousandths. Back to half. 46.5. Yeah, 47. All right, so it's picking up that 1 and then the half. All right, so I'm going to call it about 47 thousandths or so. Yep, so 47 thousandths. So we're going to call that the B dimension. So now it says to remove the bearing carrier because now we're going to be worrying about shims. And now I don't want to mix up these races here because that's going to directly impact the measurement. So now I want to keep my races handed, for lack of a better way to put it. So I'll just take that out, put it aside. And then the calculation, it's in the workshop manual. I'll throw a picture up here for you real quick. It gives you an example calculation. And you're looking at preload and all sorts of stuff. So I'm going to run through those calculations off camera and I'll come back and show you what I get. All right, so looking at my calculations here, I got 87 thousandths. That's a total amount of back and forth I got with no ring gear. And then 47 thousandths, my B dimension, was my back and forth with the ring gear. So to figure out the total shim pack thickness to make up for that difference in slop, you take your 87 thousandths, you add a 3 thousandths designated spec for your backlash there, and you get 90 thousandths. The total shim pack thickness is 90 thousandths. But now I got to figure out what's on either side so I can have that bearing, the pinion and the ring gear kind of centered up to each other. So that as you take the 47 thousandths, with this is the mesh, you add 5,000, or excuse me, subtract 5 thousandths, that's your backlash. It's all specified in the workshop manual. You get 42 thousandths on your shim pack on your Y side. I'll show you a picture here in a second. Figure out the other side, you just take your total minus what you just calculated. The shim pack at X is what you're going to get on the other side. So on one side, I'm going to look at 42 thousandths. On the other side, I'm looking at 48 thousandths. Looking at the workshop manual again for that X and Y stuff. Gives you a nice little picture there. It shows you where you measured when you measured A, what you measured when you measured B, and then your X and your Y sides. So we're going to line our shims up like that, get it in there. In this case, I'm going to need my case spreader, which is, can't believe that thing's still holding on to get these things lined up. I also got to look at my shims to make sure I can get pretty close to the shims. And we'll get that thing locked down. And then after that, I'm going to be measuring backlash, and then to verify that measurement. And then after that, I'm going to be painting some gears and see if this is any better than it was before I started all over again. Got the case spread, bearings put in, shims put in. Case is no longer under tension. But I leave the spreader on because it makes a convenient platform for my dial indicator. So now what you need to do is measure the backlash, and then depending on where the backlash comes out, you may or may not have to put shims on the other side and everything like that. Now you should be able to hear this, I think. So that's the backlash. Doesn't feel like a whole lot. The spec is 4 to 6 thousandths, so it isn't a whole lot. But we'll turn the dial indicator on. I'm not sure that you're going to be able to see it because of the lighting. Fortunately, the contrast in there is not very good, so you won't be able to see it, but we'll zero it up here. We're going to go all the way to one side, zero it up, go to the other side, and that is 4 thousandths exactly. So I am just maybe 4,500, 4.5 thousandths. Yeah, 4 thousandths. So I'm not touching it. So I'm calling that one good. So now my backlash is good. But it says if your backlash is excessive or it's too much, you take the shims from the X side, which if you remember based on that figure is the non-pinion gear side, move over to the Y, and if it's insufficient, you go the other way, and you just kind of, using the same shims. But it gets a little tricky, so I'm frankly glad this is in spec. So now we're going to take this case spreader off, and the next big thing is to now check the teeth, and essentially anything that's left after that is the crying. Gonna have to trust me when I say that these 3 gears right here are painted with Prussian blue, and we're going to roll this guy around, and I fully expect to see the same exact gear pattern that I have been seeing, and we'll see. Roll it the other way. All right, yep, I'm seeing the same pattern where I'm getting it really low on that tooth in here. And when I flip it over, I'll have essentially the opposite. No, it's actually a little bit better on that side. Oh, wait a minute here. Go around a couple times and I'll come back and take a look. As promised here, I'm gonna rotate this thing in both directions with the drill here. And we'll try to listen, because that'll be relatively indicative of whether or not I got this thing halfway decent. And then we'll, again, both directions. And let's see, I'm gonna roll this at probably 1700 RPM. 450 RPM. Well, let's do 1700 RPM. Get some oomph behind it. All right, that's one direction. Go the other direction again, about 1700 RPM, whatever the drill runs. All right, so definitely some noise there. I can smell it, smell the oil a little bit, but who knows, you know, when there's no real lubricant in it and it's doesn't have the other side of the case on it and all that kind of stuff. I mean, how loud is it going to really sound? So let's take a look at those teeth. Say I've got better than I did the first time, that's for sure, but it's still high on one side and low on the other side, and I'm not quite sure why that is. So I'm going to go ahead and take a picture of it here and ask your guys help for an assessment and see what you think and what maybe I can do to try to get this wear pattern a little bit better. But for now, that's it. So thanks for watching. Take two. Try again. Cheers.